Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Corbett. I am the host of the Corbett Report at corbettreport.com, and I would like to thank Meryl Nass and everyone putting together this symposium for inviting me to speak. And specifically, of course, this is the symposium on the attack on food and agriculture and how we can fight back. And I assume that some in the audience might take that title to be purely metaphorical, but I am here today to assure you that this is not a metaphorical idea, that this is quite literally an attack that is taking place on food and agriculture right now.
Breaking news in eastern Oregon, where crews are battling a major fire at a potato chip processing plant. Air 12 flew over the scene at Shearer's Foods on Highway 207 in Hermiston.
This is in Salinas, a huge fire at a food processing plant. This is for Taylor Farms. And right now there are concerns about a huge plume of ammonia coming from this area.
40,000 pounds of food meant to feed people in a food desert near Maricopa, south of the valley, is completely gone. And tonight, investigators are still trying to figure out what caused the fire.
Breaking news out of Pasco County. Crews battling a huge fire at a chicken farm. It's all happening on Cal-Maine Foods along Simpson Farm Lane in Dade City.
Firefighters trying to figure out what sparked a fire at a food processing plant on the west side. It happened around 9:30 last night on Merida Street near South Zarzamora.
We continue to follow that breaking news from Sutter County. A massive fire still burning right now destroyed a historic walnut factory in Live Oak. And as of right now, it shut down a portion of Highway 99 that remains closed.
In Maine, people living near a burnt-out potato processing plant were urged to stay in their homes and close their windows. The Penobscot Micram plant in Belfast, Maine, caught fire early this morning.
A Minnesota egg producer is evaluating the damage left behind from this massive fire. It happened late last night in Howard Lake, straight west of the cities on Highway 12.
Explosions rocked a Lackawanna County business after it caught fire this evening.
Yeah, crews were at the Made Right Steak Company for hours tonight, finally putting out the flames that were involved in that building.
Now, you may think that I am putting that list of clips together as a sort of cherry-picking exercise of just taking a few isolated and scattered incidents and trying to mesh them together in a way that implies that there's some sort of correlation. But I assure you, in fact, it is the exact opposite. In fact, that collection of clips came together when the other day I tasked my video editor, Brock West. I said to him, you know, there have been so many of these fires and explosions and other mysterious incidents at food processing facilities over the past couple of years. Can you just go out and collect, say, a few clips, at least 3, maybe 7 if you can manage it, of different news reports about these types of incidents? And an hour later, he got back to me and said, I could have easily gotten 70 of those clips together. It's insane how much this is happening. And yes, it is insane. In fact, if you really want to glimpse the insanity, I will direct your attention to a Z-Maps map of various incidents that have taken place along these lines, fires and problems at food processing facilities. Of course, in the United States, actually in various places around the world, if you really want to start exploring. But even if you just zoom in on the US in this map, it truly is mind-boggling the number of incidents that one can find here. For example, some sort of collapsed unknown reason grain silos. Okay, well that could be anything. Oh, a fire at night for unknown reasons at a farm. In Colombia, food pantry blessings, vandalized and stolen food. Well, again, a lot of these incidents, you could make some sort of, of course, things get vandalized, a grain silo might fall over, but fire in the middle of the night, unknown. Hacked, Iowa Grain New Cooperative, hacked. Crystal Valley Cooperative grain. Again, there's just so many of these. Fire mid-morning, etc., etc. That, yes, certainly I certainly would not think that all of these incidents are related. But, just taking a look at the number of incidents on this map, do you think there might be something going on here? I leave that for you to come to your own conclusions. And of course, when I post this to my website, I will include the link to this zmaps.com map. I will note that this, in fact, actually is a list that is primarily populated with incidents from 2021 and 2022. It looks like it hasn't even been updated in a year. So There's a lot of incidents that could be included in this list that are not. But if you are of the skeptical sort and think, well, this could just be a list of coincidences, each and every one of them just completely unrelated and totally coincidental, well, take that up with the well-known conspiracy theorists at American Military News by way of the FBI, who, as this article from last year was pointing out, the FBI was warning of cyber attacks on U.S. food plants after a dozen hit by mysterious fires. And it notes that the FBI's Cyber Division issued a statement last week, that's April of 2022, warning of potential ransomware attacks against the agricultural industry as more than a dozen food processing plants across the United States suffered damage from mysterious fires. Cyber actors may perceive agricultural cooperatives as lucrative targets, with a willingness to pay due to the time-sensitive role they play in agricultural production, the FBI notice warned. A significant disruption of grain production could impact the entire food chain, since grain is not only consumed by humans but also used for animal feed, it added. In addition, a significant disruption of grain and corn production could impact commodities trading and stocks. An attack that disrupts processing at a protein or dairy facility can quickly result in spoiled products and have cascading effects down to the farm level as animals cannot be processed. Now, that FBI warning was specifically geared towards the threat of cyber attacks against these locations. And as you see from that ZMaps, some of these are indeed cyber incidents, hacks of various sorts. But as this article goes on to note, it does come after the odd coincidence of, at that time, dozens of food processing facility fires and other mysterious incidents that had been collected, noted, and discussed by various commentators. So, including, for the second time in 1 week, a plane crashed into a food processing plant. Again, that may or may not be related, but the sheer number of incidents certainly does suggest that there is something going on. And in fact, even as I was putting this particular presentation together, even after my video editor Brock had compiled that list of clips of various attacks on food processing facilities, here we get the latest from CNN from a few days ago. Cyber attack on food giant Dole temporarily shuts down North American production, company memo says. And there's details of that incident in this article. But it is not simply related to fires, arson, explosions, plane crashes, cyber attacks. There are a number of ways that we can identify that the food production system itself is under attack from a very wide variety of vectors that seem to be coalescing into a crisis that seemingly needs some sort of solution. And we see that perhaps most startlingly in the incredible, essentially shutdown of the global economy and the global food supply chain, let alone other supply chains, in the absolutely insane lockdown measures of the past few years that led to, obviously, a squeezing of the food supply. And this was something that I noted at the time as it was happening there in May of 2020 in an article I wrote called Up Next, The Collapse of the Food Supply Chain. And as always, this is a subscriber editorial, but you can get it for free simply by clicking the free link. And when you do, you'll see the full article in which I note that this isn't these explosions, problems, supply chain bottlenecks, other problems with the food supplies is not simply limited to the United States. It is happening around the globe. In fact, it is happening in Canada and the UK and Europe and China and Japan. And every single one of those is a link to further information. And there should be one for Europe, but it looks like it didn't copy over properly. And it's not just beef and pork supplies that are being disrupted. It's milk and produce and rice and wheat. Again, link for more reading on those particular food supply bottlenecks. And it's not just the food processors whose entire industry is being upended by this chaos. It's wreaking havoc for farmers and truckers and supermarkets and restaurants. And to make it all even more horrific, the crisis won't just affect the food supply itself. It will affect all those workers in these industries who are being laid off as a result of the disruption, who now find themselves among the ranks of the recently unemployed, who are lining up at food banks, which, as you might imagine, are struggling to keep up with the record demand on their dwindling reserves, leading to stampedes in Kenya and protests in Bangladesh and looting in Colombia and clashes in South Africa. as well as the supermarket freakouts and shopping brawls breaking out in the US and Australia and the UK. And I ask rhetorically, can there be any doubt that severe food shortages will cause widespread chaos in the streets of the developed world? And in case there's any doubt, I'll just leave this here. Again, link. All of these are linked up to sources, so you can go and explore that to your heart's content. But I think that the case should be fairly self-explanatory, that there has been a profound attack on the food production system as we have known it in recent years, exacerbated, of course, by the recent invasion of Ukraine by Russia and obviously the upending of the breadbasket of Eurasia, as it were, in Ukraine, and the knock-on effects that has in various countries that depend on Ukraine for supplies of wheat and other grains, as well as fertilizer disruption. I could go on and on and on, and I will provide plenty of links for you if you want to continue exploring these various attacks. But as I say, it doesn't take a great deal of insight to be able to piece together that perhaps there may be some correlation between all of these crises that are converging on the food supply at seemingly the same time and giving rise to the same apparent need for some fundamental transformation of the food supply. And I would like to think that the people who are currently enjoying this symposium probably do not need to be led by the hand to understand or to discover the concept of some sort of false flag event in which crisis is deliberately created, perpetrated, or even just latched onto as an excuse for pushing an already existing agenda. But in case you do need some food for thought along those lines, pun intended, I'll just present these clips from some people you might have heard from before.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Because of these crises, because of the geopolitical concerns, because of the pandemic, heck, because of Brexit, we see NATO stronger too.
I think its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
Hey guys, did you know that the Chinese word for crisis is made up of two characters that mean danger and opportunity, and thus that any crisis can actually be an opportunity? And furthermore, did you know that that entire misunderstanding is based on an inability to properly read Chinese? Well, if you want more elaboration on that, I'll throw a link in the show notes. But that is the level of thinking that these erstwhile would-be world-bestriding rulers of men believe in their hearts, that any crisis is just a potential opportunity for government to do things that otherwise would seem unthinkable. And that, of course, is the underlying basic logic of, well, the false flag attack in particular, but any sort of rule by crisis in general. Whether that crisis is engineered, is part of a coordinated campaign of an attack on the food supply itself, for example, or whether it is simply an ongoing natural phenomenon, a bunch of coincidences that just seem to be happening all at once. At any rate, as long as the perception of crisis is there, it doesn't even have to be a real crisis, but as long as the perception of crisis is there, that is an excuse for people in positions of power to thrust an agenda down the gullet of the public. And you better believe that in the wake of these food supply disruptions that are taking place right now, there are those who are invested, quite literally, in Food 2.0. What is Food 2.0, you might ask? And that's a good question. And I'm sure you are familiar with some of the more normalized elements of what could be described as food revolution that it has been taking place for some time now. All the synthetic chemicals and heavily processed foods that now dominate the shelves of the supermarket, as well as the genetically modified organisms, plants and animals, that are increasingly being approved for human consumption by various regulatory agencies around the world. But that really just begins to scrape the surface of the bold new technologies that are going to start shoving, and in fact, in some cases already have started shoving, bold new foods down your throat. For example, perhaps you may or may not have heard of the bioengineered spores that are going to be inserted into the food supply so that they can track every single organism, animal or plant, from farm to fork.
Can we hear a little bit about how Annika is changing the security of the supply chains as the world becomes more and more global? Sure. Michelle?
So sort of on a high level, what we do is we use microbes as tracking devices. So what we do is we convert data, digital data, into strands of DNA. We insert that little bit of DNA into a microorganism, a probiotic microorganism, to be honest. And then we can sort of apply that organism and sort of have it hitch a ride on any food or agricultural product or really anything through the supply chain. And the reason we use a microbe to do it is because we engineer it to go into a spore. So a dormant state that allows it to be impervious to high temperatures and UV light, sort of protect that DNA barcode through transit. And so why this is important is because you can spray romaine lettuce, for example, and you can mix it around and wash it and treat it, microwave it. You can have it decay for a month and we can still re-identify sort of each leaf back to its origin. And so based off the different kind of requirements in different supply chains, that microbial tag allows us to get just really granular information throughout the entire transit without having to worry about things like, cross-contamination or of tags, or rubbing off from one thing to another. So it's just an incredibly hardy package of information.
Or have you heard of the company that's using genetically modified microbes to create peptides that taste like sugar but are digested like proteins, which, as the company likes to brag, although these microbes are technically genetically engineered, the desired products can be purified and legally sold as non-GMO.
Now, in nature, in the Garden of Eden, sugar was good enough in the apple to give you sweetness. In some places, some exotic places in today's paradise, in the jungles, this is not enough. Small plants, which are under the canopy of much taller trees, need something more to attract animals to eat their fruit and spread their seeds in new places where there is sun. And for that, they have a protein. Now, this protein in nature is not sufficiently stable. So what we do in our lab is we use a method called computational protein design, in which we take the sequence, a necklace that is the protein, a necklace built out of 20 types of beads called amino acids, and we mix and match them. Because we know that proteins don't grow only in paradise, they also grow in the Dead Sea, in hot springs, in exotic acid swamps and places like that.
So by rearranging the chain there, what's the possibility here in the future? Tell me.
So what we are doing, and you just drank it, we are making a protein which is stable. We are fitting the proteins which are found in the jungle to the mass food market.
And whether you have consumed them yourself or not, I am sure that you have seen the Impossible Burgers and the Beyond Meats and the I can't believe this didn't come from an animal lab-produced synthetic meat products that are increasingly being sold. But have you heard of synthetic celebrity cannibalism?
According to its website, Bite Labs wants to collect tissue samples from celebrities. Not for stalking, not for cloning, no, for making meat. That's right. They say they want to take the tissue, isolate the muscle stem cells, and grow the meat in bioreactors, thus making artesian salami out of your favorite stars. Each will apparently have about 30% celebrity meat and 40% animal meat, along with fats and spices. Believed and hoped to be a prank, Time magazine contacted Bite Labs to learn more and got this statement from someone who identified himself as the CEO, keeping up the charade, saying, "We want to prompt widespread discussion about bioethics, lab-grown meats, and celebrity culture. This is very important to us. We think the cultural discussion around lab-grown meats and popular culture will acclimate people to the field. According to the Bite Lab team, Jennifer Lawrence and James Franco are some of the more desired cuisines you can look hopefully forward to should they get permission and should this be real. Though I myself am looking forward to a prime cut of George Clooney.
Oh, don't worry, guys. That Bite Labs synthetic celebrity meat thing, that was a hoax or an art project or a bunch of activists who were trying to draw attention to the possibility of synthetic cannibalism or something like that. Anyway, they're not selling anything for real, so I guess it's all okay. That being what it is, I will leave you in your own time to explore some of the many, many, many lab-produced artificial food-like products that are in the process of being developed to already being shoved down the throat of the public in various forms. In fact, as you may have seen, the EU itself recently approved cricket powder for human consumption. In low enough levels, you don't even have to report it. So, pretty soon, we will be eating bugs, whether we know it or not, if we continue along the current path of buying foods at the supermarket without thinking about what we're buying. More on which at the end of today's presentation, but I think it is important to note a couple of things here. One is that there is a great food reset that is happening at the moment. It is a food 2.0, food revolution, whatever you want to call it, and I have detailed the various types of food technologies that are coming online or are already being sold to the public in a recent editorial I wrote called What is the Future of Food, that I will direct you to, where you can find many more links exploring some of the things that we've been looking at in these short clips. But I think for the purposes of today's presentation, let's tie in this concerted attack on the food supply that appears to be going on. At least the crisis is there, and the FBI and others are warning us of this crisis, and the seeming solution that is swooping down to save us from this crisis, which is we will have to fundamentally transform the food supply of the planet itself in order to continue feeding the human population. Now, as I say, that great food reset is happening. The obvious questions that arise from that observation are who is doing this and why are they doing this? Now, the first question I think is easy enough to answer, at least to throw out some names that I think, at the very least, if you have not researched yet, you can begin to do so. I wrote about this in a follow-up article to What is the Future of Food called Who is Behind the Great Food Reset, which I will also exhort you to take a look at if you are interested in this subject. But obviously some of the names that come up in there will be, I think, familiar to people who would be attending this symposium, like the Rockefeller Foundation, which not only pioneered the supposed so-called Green Revolution of the 1950s, 60s that began setting the world down the slippery path towards the Gene Revolution, more on which in a moment, in which the factory farming system was institutionalized and spread around the world through the auspices of such things as the U.S. government Food for Peace program that was essentially funding the large seed cartels and petroleum interests like the Rockefeller family were obviously heavily invested in, and others that enabled this industrialization of the food supply to proceed apace. And although obviously the Rockefeller Foundation and their cohorts have lots of money to throw at the PR surrounding that green revolution, which they like to brag fed 1 billion people around the world, or whatever it is that number has grown to, in reality, there are much, much deeper questions and problems that have arisen in the result of the destruction of traditional farming systems and communities in favor of these large industrial factory farming types of endeavors that themselves have given rise to the gene revolution, or at least provided an outlet for that gene revolution to take place, whereby now more and more resources of the the Rockefeller Foundation, I get ahead of myself, and others are going towards developing specifically crops and increasingly livestock who are genetically modified and tailored for various environments that, again, is being sold as a wonderful revolution that will increase yields, etc., although there is much evidence to show that that is, in fact, not the case. And also, as an added bonus, we get the absolute environmental destruction of the smothering of the planet in glyphosate, just to name one of the chemicals that is attendant upon this GMO cultivation, that has now become the most used agricultural product in human history and is having health effects around the world. Much more to say on that. Again, please, at the very least, type glyphosate into my search bar, and you will start to be able to explore some of that. But I do, of course, raise the specter of the gene revolution and some of the other philanthropic endeavors, like the Rockefeller Foundation, that have gotten involved in this in recent years, like, of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and perhaps, more to the point, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust, which is the investment vehicle, which is technically separate from the foundation, which is involved in its philanthropic endeavors. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Trust is the investment vehicle which is used to fund that philanthropic endeavor. And yes, you better believe, of course, Gates is invested in all sorts of aspects of the Great Food Reset, including the aforementioned Impossible Meat and Beyond Burgers and what have you, in order to profit off of the very types of food technology which we are being told is going to save the world from this perceived crisis. There's obviously a lot of information to explore there, and although the fact checkers of the world will tell you that it is not important that Bill Gates is now the single largest farmland holder in the United States, that's not important because it's just a tiny percentage of the overall farmland in the United States. It, at the very least, should give anyone who is being intellectually honest pause for thought why this multi-billionaire philanthropist is so deeply, so heavily invested in agricultural production at the same time that he is also invested in the alternatives to this agricultural production that are represented by the lab-grown meats of the future of food. There are many other players at this table, however, and that deserve to be explored. Of course, the previously alluded to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum with their consistent pimping of the Eat the Bugs agenda would be one person on that list, as would such things as the Davos of Food, which you may or may not have heard of, but you probably will in future. It's called the Eat Forum, the Stockholm Eat Forum, which convenes people, high-ranking industrial tycoons and others, bigwigs in the food world, for talks about how to transform the global food supply and the fundamental ways in which people derive their food. There's some interesting things to note about an organization like that. We could also explore the links of, again, philanthropic endeavors like U.S. aid, which is surely something that all sides of the phony left-right spectrum can get behind, of course, because it's the U.S. government giving its wonderful aid to people around the world with significant strings attached, and I don't think you need a lot of imagination to see how that can be used to foist transformations like the aforementioned green and gene revolutions on the developing world. There's so many other players at this table and so many things to get into. I will point you, for example, to an editorial I wrote a couple of years ago on Another Globalist Simulation Comes True, which shows that just as Event 201, the simulation of a globally spreading coronavirus, was taking place at pretty much the exact same time that we were asked to believe that that was actually taking place in reality, we also had the Food Chain Reaction Game, a war game, a simulation that was taking place back in 2015 that had a number of interesting elements to it. It was participated in and steered by such illustrious bodies as the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation and the United Nations Environment Program, along with some of the corporate entities that are heavily involved in the cartelization of the food supply, like Louis Dreyfus Commodities, Mars Inc., Thomson Reuters, other interesting players at that table who were wargaming out potential food crises in the future, including a 2022 looming possibility of food supply disruption that ended with in the war game simulation that was taking place again 8 years ago, ended with the EU imposing a meat tax, which eventuated ultimately, as the game played out, in a global carbon tax to save us from the scourge of global warming related food crises. So ultimately, the United Nations, of course, gets its pound of flesh as payment to the weather gods. So an awful lot of... There are many, many, many other players that could be talked about in this developing, ongoing, concerted attack on the food supply that is taking place, and the types of technologies that are being foisted on us in order to affect that transformation. But for the purposes of today's presentation, I think the other side of that question that we raised the specter of earlier is important to answer. Why are these players involved in this Food 2.0 revolution? And the obvious common factor that obviously unites, I think, every player at this table is the crass and obvious answer of money. And of course, there is lots of money to be made, especially when we start taking the natural abundance of the productivity of the earth itself, the incredible abundance of seeds giving rise to new life with minimal inputs. That process, which has sustained humanity throughout countless generations, is being swept aside out of expediency, out of necessity because of the impending global warming crisis or something along those lines, and being replaced with lab-manufactured synthetic food products that are coming from corporations. Again, it does not take a genius to understand how the monopolization of the food supply, or the cartelization of the food supply, would be very financially lucrative for all of the people literally invested in that food transformation. But having said that, I do not think that the monetary incentive is the sole explanatory agent here, and I don't think it's even the most convincing one. Yes, there certainly is money to be made, and that will unite all of these players in this agenda, but I think that there is a much deeper agenda going on here, and that is alluded to in my use of the moniker the Great Food Reset, because I think Food 2.0 and this revolution that we are living through is very much connected into the Great Reset that the World Economic Forum has been talking about for the last few years, propounded by the likes of Klaus Schwab, who has told us repeatedly that the Great Reset involves all of these incredible systemic transformations that are brought about by Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies, the brain chips and the AI and the synthetic foods and whatever else is coming, that will ultimately serve to converge our biological and physical and digital identities. Now, that sounds like a very pie-in-the-sky concept, so there's a lot that needs to be elaborated on in order to truly appreciate what is being said in a statement like that. But I think it is important to note that there is a broader transformation, not just of the food supply, but if we are what we eat, then the transformation of the food supply does indicate a transformation of humanity itself. And just as organisms are increasingly being genetically modified and engineered, I think the human species is also being transformed, engineered, genetically and otherwise, by the types of technologies that I think the food transformation, Food 2.0, are just one subset of. This is part of a larger transhuman agenda, which is embodied in that phrase by Klaus Schwab. Again, do not take this from James Corbett. Take it from people like Schwab, who are promising that the future holds the convergence of our biological and digital identities. I think humans are being engineered to better interface with machines as the brain chips and other technologies start to come online. And well, I think the machines will require different energy components than simply this organic food stuff that we've been used to as regular substrate human 1.0. This will sound absolutely outlandish to people who have not studied this agenda. And all I can say is I have thousands and thousands of hours of media that I think will start to fill in some of the blanks that sound absolutely outlandish to people who have not encountered this before. Some of the key words that I would highly suggest that you check out not only include the aforementioned transhumanism, but specifically the key phrase biodigital convergence. And once again, please do not take it from James Corbett, Joe Schmo living in Japan. Who's this guy? Please take it from the sources themselves. For example, I will point you in the direction of a very interesting document from Policy Horizons Canada, a future think-do tank that is part of the government of Canada, that put out a document on biodigital convergence a few years ago and followed it up I believe, last year, talking about this melding of the physical and digital worlds as machines become more and more integrated with organic life, and start to think of this engineering of the food supply in those terms, because at that point, I think we start to see this is about much more than simply accruing dollars in the bank accounts of some of these would-be world controllers. Once again, there is a lot of information here and a lot to go through. So when I post this to my website, I will, of course, as usual, post all of the documents that I cite, all of the references that you have watched or observed today will be there in the show notes for you to begin exploring these extremely deep matters. But I just want to, at the very least, put on the plate today that connection between all of these coincidental or purposeful attacks on the food supply that are taking place right now, and how that is leading to a transformation of the food supply that in turn is feeding into a transformation of the human species itself. These are incredibly important, incredibly large topics. So I hope that this presentation has at least opened the door to get you thinking along the lines of this. So at the very least, you can identify this agenda, and you, as a sovereign, independent human being, can take actions to, at the very least, not literally buy into this agenda by simply buying whatever is on the supermarket shelves without even thinking about it. No, there are things that we can do. And so finally, as I am wont to do at the Corbett Report, I will leave you today with something a little bit more hopeful. At any rate, something that we can be doing about this, the solution side of this. I also wrote a follow-up editorial to the previous two mentioned editorials. The future of food is ours to decide, where I talk about our role in either accepting, literally buying into this agenda as it is rolled out to us, or rejecting it, and finding alternative ways of feeding ourselves, as humanity has done for countless generations before us. I do not think that the problems we are facing are insurmountable and can only be solved by the would-be rulers of the world who are using every crisis as a potential opportunity. That being said, I am out of my allotted time for today, so I want to thank you very much for your time and attention, and direct you once again to CorbettReport.com for more information on this subject.